press record. I always sucked at that, so I did it this time. um, and if I share my screen here, uh, okay. I am on a new computer, so I might have to quit Zoom and reopen and let it share my screen. I will be right back. I'm sorry, I should have figured all this out ahead of time.
Make me co-host, and then we should be able to get back in.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Uh,
I don't know if it matters actually, but just in case.
yeah, good call. Okay, be right back, folks. Uh, okay. Now let's see if this works. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start all this off by saying I've never taught this material before. So this is kind of my first time through it, really with people. Please feel free to interrupt me, ask any questions you'd like. There are probably some holes and some explanations, but we're gonna get through it here. So okay, we're gonna be talking about today and tomorrow this concept of what's called auth. Today we're going to be talking about the client side of auth, the sort of first part of this material. So our goal for class today is we're going to adapt a project you've written in the past with Max to include this auth piece. And by the end of the day, or the end of the class, you should be able to like sign into your application and go through the whole auth workflow we're going to talk through. So the first thing I want to talk about here is this term auth. It kind of gets used in two different ways. Authentication and authorization. These are sort of two words that get thrown around. And what do these sort of terms mean? So authentication is sort of I think probably the most important of the two and sort of the place to start. And authentication is the process of verifying that a user is who they say they are. So imagine you're using an application. You need to, as a client or as a user, you've got to tell another system like a server, you've got to tell the system who you are in order to do certain things in that system. So here's an example. Let's say you're on like a social media application and you want to create a new post. For you to do that, when you create that post, the server has to know who you are. You can't just create a post in a vacuum because like that post needs to be associated with like your user. It needs to be shown to like all your followers and shown on like your profile page. So in order for you to perform this action of like creating a post, the server needs to know who you are. And that's done through this mechanism authentication. That's sort of the way by which this is typically done. So when you authenticate as a user, you authenticate to a system. This will give the system information about you. So that could be like your name, email address, a profile image. Think of the kind of bits of like metadata that you would normally include in like a user profile kind of form. So this is like information that you might that you would then provide to the server to say, oh, this is who I am. But, and this is kind of the key distinction between authentication and authorization, authentication does not tell the system what you can or cannot do. It only tells you who you are, or who is making the request. So on the other hand, authorization is kind of the other piece that often gets lumped into this auth topic. They both kind of start with the letters AUTH. So people use this word auth, and they kind of end up meaning both. So that's kind of why I'm trying to disambiguate here, because it's often unclear what people mean. And before we can really get into that, I got to talk about kind of the two different things people might mean. So authorization is kind of the other part. And that is, okay, so the system knows who you are, but that's only part of it. The system needs to also understand what you can and cannot do. So going back to that social media application I talked about, that kind of example, let's say you've authenticated as a specific user, and you want to create a post. So what you do is you tell the server you want to create a post. You make a request, you say, please create a post. And the server needs to understand, are you allowed to create a post? Maybe for some reason you've been banned or something, and you're not allowed to make posts. Like that's just like an ability that you've been blocked from doing. So that's like an ability that you need to be able to have. Like the server needs to know if you can create a post. So the way it would do that is it would check the user you are authenticating as, and it would see if you are authorized, sort of to use those two terms, to do the specific action. Another sort of phrase that gets used for this is permissions. So you might have a system that has a list of permissions, things that a user can do, and that list is sort of managed by the system to make sure that every user is authorized to do a certain set of actions. So these two pieces are both very important parts of this whole auth world. Before I move forward, any questions about authentication, authorization, sort of how they relate? Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward then. We're going to be spending most of our time today and also tomorrow, but especially today, with authentication, less about authorization. That's not to say they're not both important. They both are very important. But you can't really authorize until you've authenticated. Like you need to know who somebody is before you can figure out if that said person can do a thing. So we kind of got to start with authentication. And we're going to touch on authorization kind of at the end, but Max is going to end up doing a bit more of that with you next week. Okay. So I just talked about authentication and authorization kind of at like a 10,000-foot view. But there's, of course, a lot of technical details about how something like this could work. And as you probably can guess, there's like a lot of ways you could go about building systems to perform these two roles. Like building a system that could somehow figure out who a user is and then what a user can do. I'm going to walk you through, though, probably the most straightforward way people tend to build an authentication system. Just to give you an idea of how one might go about doing this. And then we're going to talk about why maybe what I walk through is like good and bad. So one of the most common workflows that I would imagine everyone on this call is familiar with is a username and password login workflow. So everyone kind of knows it. You go to the login page, you type in a username or an email or some sort of user identifier, and then you type in a password, some sort of like secret phrase that only you should know. You click login, and once you've done that, now you're sort of in the main application. So that's kind of how the workflow works. There's like a login page. You go to the login page, you type in your stuff, you hit submit, and then you're in the application. So let's talk about how that might be built. So going through kind of step by step here, what you might do to start with is you might have like a login form. So you would have a page in your web application. So like using some lingo you might be familiar with, you might have like a page in your React router sort of layout that you've done with Max. And then in there, you might have like a login page. In that login page, you might render some input type texts in there. You might style them up all kind of fancy. You might have a button that says something like sign in. And you could make sort of a form that looks kind of like this. So you visit that login page, and then now you've sort of got your controls here. So once you're here, user can type in username, password, and click sign in. And then once they click sign in, you sort of now have the data that's in those input fields. You do the thing with React where you do like you have a use state and you sort of hook that state up to the different input fields. So you've got the text that's been typed into them. But once you click sign in, this is sort of where where things kind of start to get more abstract. So one way, probably the most common way you'll see this done, especially in sort of smaller scale apps, is the client will then make a request to the server that contains the information in those text boxes. So just imagine maybe like making a post request like /login on your server, and you have some JSON in the body, maybe with like a key of username and then a key of password. So you send this information to the server. So you've now taken everything that's in that form, and the server now knows about it. Okay. So then once the server's received this information, this login information, the server will sort of unpack that, get out the username and password, get that data. And what it will do is it'll look in some sort of database table, some sort of table, let's say like a users table. And imagine your users table here has like a column of ID, column of username, a column of password. So you do something like you say, okay, so I've got my username and password. Let's sort of find a row where they line up. And if you find a row where they line up, then great, you're good. You've sort of successfully you've realized that the credentials that were entered were valid, so you can sort of like bring the user through the rest of the workflow. But if you don't find an entry in that table, you're like, oh, okay, so I guess there's no username and password that's valid here, and that's where you give the user back an error message. You send back a response like, couldn't log in, bad credentials, try again. Okay, so let's sort of assume like things went well. You were able to find a row in that user's table that matched. So then what you do is you have like another table. Let's call it the tokens table. And in our tokens table, we've got 3 columns: an ID, just like our users table. We've got a user ID. So the user ID is the ID from our user table, kind of the foreign key to that users table. So I know this is something Max has just introduced to you, this idea of relationships between database tables. But this is a thing that's pretty common. So effectively here, like in our table here, I've got a row where this row here relates to this user right here. And then the last column I've got in my table here is a token column. So what I'll do is, typically in this sort of login workflow, I'll do something like make a new row. So after I've like brought the user through the check to make sure the credentials match, you make a new row in that tokens table. So you've got like a new row there, and you send that back to the client again. And this new row contains a new token value. And this token value is sort of what the client gets back. And now this value, they can use and they can include in further requests to then prove that they are the person who just logged in. So this is where like you might have like make another request with an authorization bearer, this token kind of thing. And that would include that credential in the request. And now you know, oh, okay, this request was from the user that just logged in. So therefore, I can assume the person who logged in, like, so I guess I should have drawn this out as a diagram, but like, got this token here. If I include that in a request, I can look that up in this database table and be like, oh, that's this user. And if I know that's that user, then I know, oh, that's the user with the username of this, and all. That's sort of how I can like figure out, like I can backtrack to which user that was. So Natasha says, so we are going to have access to the user's credentials of the people who sign into our sites. That is a great comment. And if you build it this way, yeah, this is a thing that well, I'm gonna touch on this in a second, but in many cases, when you're building these sort of workflows, like you've got to store all that data and manage it, and it's kind of just like part of the task. So I do have a little more I want to say that in a second. Before I continue, I did want to ask if anybody else had any questions or if that made sense. If it doesn't make sense, that's great. I want to hear about it. I want to clarify some things. But yeah, give me, if you can, give me like a thumbs up reaction if it was good, or give me a thumbs down if it wasn't good. Um, so Palash asks, there's a new token every time a user signs in or signs up. So it really depends on how you build it. That's probably how I would build it. So a thing I left out of this for simplicity is typically on a token, you might have another column that's like an expiry time. So imagine a column like an expires at timestamp. And then when you create that token, you generate that timestamp by taking the current time and like adding maybe, let's say, like a day. And then when you're doing that token check, you check to see if the token's in there, but you also check to make sure that expiry time has not like passed. So that's kind of how you end up handling that, like tokens, like making sure those tokens expire after a certain amount of time. And that also kind of, if you do it that way, it means you do have to generate a new token every time. Another thing you can do is you could just like get the latest token and then increase that expiry time. That's something else I've done in the past too. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. Like I'm just giving you sort of one potential path you could take. So Natasha says something like a link to change a password. Yeah, so like that's a if you went through like imagine like a change password kind of workflow, like yeah, you might need to reauthorize or reauthenticate the user. You all are touching on a lot of stuff I'm gonna mention in the next slide. So I'm being a little like brief because I'm gonna say it in like 2 minutes. But before I get to some of these things, any questions about what I just went through? I saw a decent number of thumbs up, so I'm guessing that was overall pretty good. Okay, cool. So, okay, pros and cons of this. So this is, to be clear, this sort of way of building like a login workflow is traditionally how people have done it. And for the most part, it's relatively straightforward to implement. Like, I mean, I saw a decent number of thumbs up. Like, you all were able to generally understand what was being said, it sounded like. So, like, it's a thing that it's not super complicated. There's not like 10 million different pieces that all have to communicate. You can make a diagram that sort of walks you through how it works, and it's pretty easy to understand. It's also a paradigm that users are very familiar with. So, like, if a user goes through this process, like they see username and password box, they kind of know what they're doing. Like you don't have to try to explain to a user either with like text or special designs to like communicate some unusual login workflow. It's like something that everyone understands who uses the internet. And lastly, and this is sort of what's going to touch on some of what you just said, a couple of folks just said, if it's implemented correctly, it's relatively secure. And I picked my language very carefully there because it's very easy to screw this up. So I want to be like cognizant of, I gave some suggestions just now of certain things that like you could maybe do. And there's the suggestions I gave would work. But with these particular types of things in particular, like these sorts of workflows that are authentication based, like it working isn't really good enough. It needs to be secure because these workflows are guarding your application, are making sure that users can only like access what they should be able to do. So like there's the authentication and the authorization piece, but like if you were to like authenticate as the wrong user by accident, then the whole authorization piece kind of goes out the window because if you're somebody else, then you can do a whole different set of things. So like this is code where every time I've had to build a login form or like a login workflow like this, there is a lot of testing that goes into the system to make sure that things work as people expect. Because I would say like even on top of like there's like sort of a regular risk tolerance people have normally towards like code. I'd say like this is another level on top of that. So this is all to say that a lot of suggestions that we talk through, while they might work, I don't know necessarily if in practice they would be like the best idea. So like this is why you don't try to get creative with this stuff. You sort of do what's like the thing that people do, because when you get creative, it means you make mistakes, in my experience. So this is all to say that like it's a this is code that is high risk. You need to treat it with the respect that it deserves. Okay, so the other con here is we just went through the login workflow, but Natasha, you kind of touched on like change password. Typically, there's a lot of workflows you have when you're building out a system like this. So, I mean, think about like anytime you log into a system. So you've got like a login workflow. You've usually got like a sign up workflow. You've usually got like a change password workflow. You've got like a forgot password workflow, which is importantly different than a change password workflow. So change password is like you're logged in, you want to change your password. Forgot password is like you forgot your password and you're logged out and you need to like reset your password. That's usually the whole like send an email to somebody. They like click on the link in their email. It brings them back into the application. They like type the password twice to click submit. Like that whole little dance that you're probably all familiar with. And there's also like workflows like oh gosh, there was one more that I was going to say as well. Anyway, there's like a handful of these things, and all of them are all vectors to exploit that are things you have to be like very cautious about that you make sure you get correct. So and the thing is though, like many applications have these workflows. Like these aren't like special, like they all kind of work the same for the most part. Like if you go to one application and you go through their like sign in workflow, like it's probably going to be pretty close to like another applications, or the same thing with like the forgot password workflow or like the sign up workflow. Like these are all kind of well trodden paths. So because of that, we're going to be able to take some shortcuts. So Corwin, you asked how do one-time use tokens work? Um, can you explain what you're referring to? Because there's a couple things you might be asking about. I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking.
Like, say you forget your password and they need to like verify you, and then they send you like a one-time like token.
Yeah, so you're talking about like the text messages thing, or like the email, like they send you an email with like the like 6-digit code in it.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So probably the easiest way to build something like that. This is also to say maybe not the most secure way, but like a way you could build this is imagine you have a database table of one-time codes, and it's sort of similar to like the tokens table where you've got like each code's probably linked to a user, and then every code probably has like an expiry time. So what happens is you click like the generate one-time code button, or like you do whatever would trigger that in the application. It'll create a new database table row. And then for there'll be a column that's like one-time code value or something. So you have like expires at, user ID, one-time code value. Those are probably the most important columns, and ID. But like, so you have those four. And then that one-time code column could be like you just generate like a 6-digit code and you put it in there. You maybe do something where you generate a random code and then you do a query on the database to see if anyone else has used that code. If there's any other cases where that code's active, you don't want duplicates. So you do something where you like generate a random code, see if it exists. If it does, generate another random code, see if it exists. If it does, like keep going around until you got a unique one or something. So you could do that. And then on the other end, like, so you then would like after you've got that in the database table, you'd then programmatically send an email or a text message to a user to tell them, oh, okay, like you should like this is where what your code is. So then like on the other end, when they either like click the link or whatever it is, like they like are looking at the thing where they have to type in the code, they type in that code, and then that will make a request to the server, which will then look at that table and like do the query to be like, is there a code with the certain value that is not expired? And if it isn't expired, then sort of you let the user through. If it is, you give them an error. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Natasha's answer the secret question. Yeah, so like those that's for what it's worth, it's actually a pretty outdated security mechanism. It's so funny that a lot of like banks and stuff use it because it's like you can get a lot of that from social networks. So it's like I'll say like at least I've heard as recommended from like security professionals with this sort of things, like it's actually sometimes more secure to like just pick like random phrases and to just put those in and store those like separately, like in a password manager or something. So they're not actually like you just like pick a random question and like put in like a random word answer or something. So they're like you can't like fish it and get whatever. But like how that works is let's say you have like a user table, maybe you have like a question table. And that question table is like a one-to-many with a user. So a user has many questions, a question has one user. So then on that questions table, you have something like a user ID column. So you've got like ID, user ID, and something like question, like, I guess like question, and then like answer, maybe are your columns. So what happens there is like once you've got that data, you maybe want to show that thing to a user. So your client might make a request to the server. And that request would be like, give me the questions. The server will return back to you a list of like all the questions. So importantly, not the whole row, just the question parts. And it will show that to the user, and the user has to enter their answers. And then when they click submit in that form, it'll then send the answers back to the server, and the server will sort of like verify them in the database table, make sure they all match. And if they all match, it sort of lets you through, doesn't it gives you back the error. I mean, you can maybe see a lot of these workflows are actually kind of similar in what they're doing behind the scenes. Like it's a lot of, you give some part of a database table, and then you let the user enter the other part, and then you verify to make sure those parts line up. So yeah. Now I wanted to cover something also real quick here before we get on to the more abstract tools we're going to be using to do this. So here's an example security hole in what I wrote, like what I showed you, the little demo we did with the login workflow to show you the kind of thing that maybe like would be like a subtle thing that could be potentially very problematic. So in this system, in our users table, we've got a column for password. And this password is just what's called in the clear. It's just like in the database table, you've got a list of all the users' passwords. This is very, very bad. Like, very, very bad. You should never do this. And like the reason why you should never do this is if for any reason your database table were to become exposed in like a security leak. And that could be like nefariousness, like someone hacks in or whatever. Or like it could be not nefarious, it could be like legal. Like you'll have situations where like a company will get sued, and during the discovery process, like they'll subpoena like database tables or like database records. So like that stuff can get out. And what that means is like if you leak this, you've now just shared the user's password. And if they're like using that common password for other like sites, I mean, they shouldn't do that, but a lot of people do that. Then now all of a sudden, let's say that data becomes public, like people can just try those credentials and potentially break into other people's sites and other different platforms. So this is very bad. You should not do this. Now you might be wondering, what should you do? And I'm going to say this with the caveat that I am not a security expert. And if I were going to build a system like this, I'd make sure that I was following all the most up-to-date advice. But my understanding is the best thing you can do these days is what's called hashing and salting your passwords. So like very quickly, just because folks are probably curious about that, like there's this idea of what's called a hash function. It's like a cryptography thing, but very high level. Imagine a function like a black box where when you put in a text string into that black box, it gives you out a random letter and number text string output. So you give it like a word or give it a password, and then it gives you like a random letter and number string. But importantly, every time you give that hash function the same password, it always gives you the same random letter, number, and string. So if you, let's say, for example, instead of storing the passwords, you stored the hashed passwords. Now what that means is you don't have their actual password. You have sort of like this like randomized version of it. But because that function's predictable, if you have someone's password and you hash their password, you can now check to see if that hash result that you computed locally when logging in, like in the login endpoint, you can now compare that in your list instead of the actual literal password. And that's typically how they recommend you do it. There's another thing called salting that's also important. That's another bit, but like that's even more complicated. I'm not going to get into it. But if you're really curious, you can click on the link. Oh, I actually realized I forgot to send the slides in Slack. Let me do that.
Ryan, while you're doing that, I have a question.
Cool. Should be in the CICC5 channel. Folks want to follow along. But yeah, go ahead.
So about 10 years ago, I used to do work for a Mechanical Turk through like Amazon and Google.
Yeah.
Which was like we kind of help with like machine learning for like developers, like you know what it is. Anyway.
I've been on the other end of that system, so very familiar with it.
Okay, great. So back then, like I was like, verifying pictures. I really didn't have an idea of what I was doing, but now I notice that it's utilized for websites. Would you call that a form of authentication or authorization that you're teaching us today, or is that something totally different?
I'd say that's kind of different.
It's like make sure you're not a robot, that type of stuff.
Yeah, so like I guess there's a whole sort of sphere you're touching on here, but Mechanical Turk as a system. So for folks who aren't familiar, like Mechanical Turk is an Amazon AWS product that allows I guess I would say like engineers or folks who are sort of building systems that need to have a human involved in the system to effectively like hire people on a contract basis to do like often like very repetitive menial tasks like to make a system work. A place that's used very often is with the systems that are like machine learning based. You need to generate large tomes of data to tell a system like to classify things. Like imagine you have like a bunch of images and you want to tell the system like have it figure out like what's a car, what's not a car. So you give a bunch of images to a person, you tell them like, oh, cars here, cars here, cars here. You feed that output to a computer, it can kind of learn that stuff. So, but like one use case for Mechanical Turk that historically it was used for, nowadays I think maybe less, I could be wrong, is what's called breaking of a CAPTCHA. So CAPTCHAs are these things that historically the way they work is they would, when you're logging into like a tool, they're a way that you would be able to prove if someone who's logging in is a computer or a real person. So what it would do is it would show you sort of some sort of garbled thing that in theory a computer would have trouble deciphering, and then would ask a human to generate or type in the box what they see. So usually it would be like maybe the old school versions were like text that were like in weird fonts with like different sizes, and like they've gotten a lot more complicated to now actually the way they work is like all like they use machine learning themselves to do crazy things. I don't know. Anyway, but like the reason why this is kind of a whole sphere is like Mechanical Turk itself, that's kind of ancillary to this whole like auth piece. Like it's unrelated. But what you are touching on there kind of briefly is there are like Mechanical Turk or tools like that can be used to try to like break these authorization or authentication tools. So if you have something like a CAPTCHA in your process, it's like a step in your login process. Like that might be a tool you might use as sort of someone more nefarious or maybe more like gray hat to be like, oh, I need to work around these authentication mechanisms. So that might be a way you could do it. Anyway, that was probably a bit rambly. Was that helpful or not?
Just thank you for, going about my question. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, CAPTCHAs have a cool history. If folks are curious, like it's an interesting read to spend a few hours learning about them. But anyway, so really I want to bring up the security hole because for the most part, it's developers these days try to avoid building auth systems if they can. They are tricky to get right. Typically, if you do need to build it, you will either do a bunch of research beforehand, or you'll actually like hire somebody who's like an expert in it, who has built a lot of this stuff. Because if you get it wrong, it can be a substantial problem that can, like, if you're like a startup, you screw this up, like it can be like kind of be like a big problem, especially if you're like early on and maybe even kill the company. So it's like a thing you really want to get right. So because of that, we're actually not going to build our own auth system. We're going to be using a third-party service, an unrelated, like a service we can sort of like that implements auth that we're going to use instead of building our own, like a library tool. And the tool we're going to be using is this thing called Clerk. So I also am going to put out there that we haven't actually taught Clerk in Careers in Code before. We've used a few other tools in the past. All of these, so we sort of went through a bunch of this auth stuff, and I sort of walked through why it can be difficult. So to kind of continue that chronology a bit, what would happen is like after like people kind of had that realization, they were like, wait a second, we can build these like third-party services that people can use to implement auth instead of having to write our own. So a couple of them came out, people like used them, things were like going well. But what ended up happening is those systems over time got super, super complicated to the point where configuring them almost was as difficult as writing auth in the first place. So it became this thing where, and we actually used to teach one of those services in Careers in Code called Auth0, one I've used in the past as well. And these systems like are still probably a better choice than writing it yourself, but are still really complicated to configure. The thing I really like about Clerk, this is a service I'm pretty new to. I've only used it about 6 months ago for the first time, and I've used it a few times since then, is it's one of the few of these services where it like has not been hard to configure. Like it largely pretty much works out of the box. And that just got me kind of excited a little bit about it here. So this should be like relatively straightforward, I think, but of course, famous last words, we'll see how it goes. So we're going to use Clerk to implement auth, authentication in particular, in a project that you've worked on with Max. So we're going to effectively add a login page, add sort of all the different pieces to that. So you can like log into this application and you can see like some private data. You're like on a special like authenticated user only page. You can see information about that user. You can like manage the user's preferences. We're going to sort of build all that by using Clerk. And then tomorrow, we're going to sort of tie that into the server. So, okay, you've now logged in with the user. How do you like communicate with the server and like get data from the server that's like privileged for only one user? So that's tomorrow. Today, we're just going to focus on getting Clerk set up in a web application. Okay, any questions about that before I move forward? Okay. Oh, yeah. So I also wanted to mention Clerk supports a lot more than just username and password. We're actually going to be using Clerk's probably sign in with Google features is the one that I've found to be the easiest to kind of get started with here. So you're probably familiar with this auth flow too if you've used more modern web applications, but like you have a button that says like sign in with Google. You click that button, it opens a little thing that shows all your Google accounts. Click your Google account and it like has a little spinner and it like goes into the application, you're all signed in and it's great. And you don't have to like remember username and password for every individual site. It's pretty nice. Now, to build that can be a real challenging endeavor to do well. I've done it before. It's not fun, especially Google. Their APIs really suck for this. Another one that Clerk supports is two-factor authentication. So this is kind of like that, a little like that one-time code thing, Corbin, you brought up, where like you sign in and then they give you a little box and they send you like a text message to your phone and then you can like receive that code and then enter the code into the thing and then it'll let you through. So it's like another sort of level of security. Clerk implements for you the whole sign up, sign in, change password, all those workflows we talked about. It's sort of got built out for you, which is great. And even more. Okay, so I am largely going to steal what we're going through here. Like I'm stealing what we're doing here from this blog post. So I've taken this blog post and sort of like formatted it a bit to make it work with what Max put together. But if you want to go through that blog post on your own, or like you want to see maybe a different way to explain it, like that blog post and the rest of today are like basically one for one identical, just like different ways of Amy explaining it. So, okay, so this is where things become a bit more interactive, and I get to stop just like talking at you all. I needed a project to kind of get started with here, and I believe, according to Max, you should all have, there's a React portfolio project you all did, where you built a little like portfolio application. This hopefully is familiar to everybody, I'm guessing. Yes? Okay, excellent. Now, does everyone have that application locally on their system? Like, do you have it on your computer? Okay, let me do it this way. Does anybody not have it on their computer? And if you don't, no problem. Just I want to make sure everyone can follow along. Okay, I'm going to take that as everyone's got it, which is excellent. Because if you don't have it, Max's example is on GitHub. So you can clone that down and take a look at it. Or if you're having trouble with Git, I can send you a zip export of it so you can have it on your end. But yeah, this is where you'd need to go to get it if you don't have it locally. Okay. So Sequoia, you said what week? It's week 16, day 4. Cool. So, yeah, I can send it to you, Danny. I'm going to do this. So in Slack, I'm going to put a zip file in the CIC C5 channel. You should be able to open up that zip file, and inside should be a React portfolio directory. I just took like the code from that folder that I linked here and just put in that zip file. So you should be able to do that and be good. You can also clone it down as well, but Max said you all were still not super familiar with Git, so the zip file might be easier to write now. Okay. So I am going to, I know how you all like the VS Code live share thing. So I'm going to give that the old try again here, and hopefully I'll be successful. Where to go? There we go. Okay. So got this link here. So I just posted that in the CIC C5 channel. That should give you access to my VS Code window, I think. Can someone give it a shot and let me know if it, I guess I'll see the notifications if it works. Yeah, here we go. Excellent. I think also I made it read only this time. That was a mistake I made last time. I'm trying to learn from the last time here. Cool. So I am also going to, over here in a terminal, so I've just cd to the directory. I'm going to run npm start to kick, npm install first. I'm guessing you're all pretty familiar with the whole npm install, npm start dance at this point. So just ran npm install, just going to run npm start here. Okay, excellent. So I've got Max's copy here. I don't know of my own. Okay. Cool. So I think I'm ready to get going here. Anybody need a couple seconds to oh wait, there are a couple messages here. So a few people asked about the zip file or zip folder. If you go to Slack in CIC C5, it should be right here. So you should be able to just click on this and download it. And Palash said, I had mine deployed on Git, so it has a build folder. Will that block what we're doing today? Nope, should be fine. You're going to want to run it with npm start instead of like going to the build folder or anything like that. So you're just going to run it in like local development server mode. I will say though, everything we're going to do today, if you were to run like to build it afterwards and deploy it, should work. Actually, I take that back slightly. There's, I think, 1 or 2 places where we're going to hard code localhost, but you just hard code it to be like where it's ever deployed instead. So I think that probably makes sense.
Should I make a local copy of it? Will that be better?
Yeah, you can do that if you want. Okay. Since it seemed like folks are still kind of getting things set up, if you're ready to go, can you give me a thumbs up reaction in Zoom, just so that and if you want to just follow along in the live share, like that works too. But I imagine you probably want to do it, but up to you, I guess. Wow, very cool. The Zoom like reactions are animated now. That's new. Cool. Okay. I'm probably just going to start going here unless anyone screams at me. So let's do it. The way I've kind of structured this is I've got sort of a bunch of like step by step, just like do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then we're good kind of thing. So we've got a couple different sort of sections with some middle bits, but so the first part here is we got to have you all create a Clerk account. So I've got a little video here recorded ahead of time because I've already got my account created. So let me make this full screen. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to clerk.com in a web browser. And once you've done that, you're going to want to click sign up in the corner. And if you want to watch the video on your own, you're welcome to do that as well. And once you do that, you're going to want to click continue with GitHub. And then once you do that, you're going to want to sign in with your GitHub account to Clerk. And then you have to, if you're like me, you have to enter a one-time PIN, but oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. And I had to click a confirm thing there, whatever. It's probably going to ask you to authorize, just sort of go through, just click all the green buttons. Okay. And then once you get through that whole sign-in process, you should be at something that looks kind of like this. So all you're going to have to do here is an application name. Just put in whatever you want to call your app. I just went with test app. You call it portfolio. It doesn't really matter for the context of this, this exercise. And then once you've done that, click create application. And then that's it.
Ryan, I just have one question. You signed in using the GitHub? Or
I did. Yeah, you can probably sign with Google too, but GitHub worked better for me.
okay, thank you.
Yep. So I can go through that again if folks need to, or you can watch the video in the slide. So Kenny said, what was the last step? So you want to, the name of your app should be something like test app or portfolio. And then you want to just click create application, the main button there in the interface. And then you should, after that, be like in a view where you've, well, I'll just bring it up here so you can actually, wait, even better. I'll show you what mine looks like because that's what you would be at. You should be in a view that looks kind of like this.
Ryan, do I do authorize clerking?
Yep, click click accept or whatever the green button says.
Brian,
Yep.
I have my title and everything and I'm logged in, but you know, for the little radio kind of like pull over buttons on the side, like do you want them to do username, etc.? Did you have any specific ones selected or just the default ones?
Just the default one's fine for now.
Okay.
We're gonna play with that a little bit later. So Quota, you said, what do we do for application name? I called mine test app. It doesn't really matter. Portfolio works, whatever you, the name's not all that important. You just got to give it some sort of name. Okay. So that's step one. Any other questions before I keep moving here? Okay. So step two, we got to install Clerk into our portfolio project. So I'm just going to take this command. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to run it in my terminal. So npm install, you're probably all familiar with that at this point. We're going to install a package called @clerk/clerk-react. So I'm going to hit Control C over here. I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to hit enter. And once I've done that, I'm going to run npm start again just so I've got my oh. Yeah. Okay, cool. And I'm correct in assuming you all are familiar with npm install at this point, right? Like, I'm guessing so, but I'm not sure. Excellent.
Am I supposed to be getting 6 high severity vulnerabilities?
Yeah, the way the JavaScript ecosystem works, things tend to move pretty fast. And well, I'm trying to avoid going off on like a whole big thing right now. I'm just gonna say yes, that's totally fine. And the fact it's totally fine makes me very frustrated. But yeah, the npm audit option can be nice. It's like a half-baked solution to the problem. It does solve part of it, but it also doesn't quite either. I don't know. Yeah, the security implications of installing dependencies in JavaScript are troublesome to say the least. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Any assistance? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep moving here step by step. Okay. So next, we need to add what's called our publishable key to the project. So Clerk has a couple different values that we need to include for Clerk to like like Clerk to be able to link itself, like our application to link itself with like the dashboard like account we just made. So they need to sort of like be able to know each other exists. And the way that that works is a sort of a token that Clerk will generate that we've got to put into our local application. So we'll copy that token from the dashboard and then put it into our local application. And that will tell Clerk, the local version of Clerk, that it needs to talk to the version of the dashboard we have open in our web browser. So the way you do this, I've also got a video for this. I didn't record a ton of videos, but I did for these first couple steps. So inside of, okay. On the page you just got to in the dashboard, you're going to want to click the React button. So it's the second button from the left under Quick Starts. And then once you click that, you're then going to want to take the API keys section below. You're going to click the little copy icon in the little black box. What that's going to do is going to take everything in that black box and it's going to copy it to your clipboard. So then once you've done that, you're going to want to go into your code editor and you're going to want to create a new file. And you're going to call that file .env.local. So I just made a new file .env.local. And that name is very important. The casing is very important. There's also importantly not a file extension there like .env.local. It's not like .env.local.txt or something. It's just like .env.local. Like that's the entire file. So make a file called .env.local. And then inside of that file, you're going to want to paste what you copied from Clerk. And then save your file. So effectively, everything in that black text box in Clerk needs to be a verbatim into that .env.local file in your project. So I'm going to do that here on my end. So over here. So I'm going to go over to here. I'm going to go to React. I'm going to copy that. I'm then going to go over to here. And then the root, I also should have said in the root of your project. So not in the SRC directory, like in the root, like at the same level as like package.json or package.lock.json. You're going to want to make a new file, not an SRC, in the root. Okay. There we go. .env.local. And now I'm going to paste. Cool.
Wait, Ryan, how did you make that outside of the SRC?
I'll be honest, I'm not actually sure what I did there. I think I clicked. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the same thing. You can just click on like your package.json file, and then since it's in that folder, it'll just make a new file when you click the new file icon in that folder. It's annoying to make files there. I hate it.
Ah, okay. You can tell who uses VS Code every day and who doesn't.
Wait, so just to confirm, we did two .env, right? One in the React portfolio, like local, like the whole local folder, and then one in the SRC.
You only want
No.
one. Oh, you only want one file in the root of your project .env.local. You don't want anything to be an SRC at this point.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep. Cool. Okay. Also, I'm going to mention it. I think folks probably realize this, but everyone's publishable key is going to be different because it like links to their account. So like this is kind of like a secret value. You probably shouldn't share it, but this is maybe a less secret value, if that makes any sense. The .env.local file is not in the SRC directory. It's in the root of the project. So see how this is here, but my SRC directory is closed. It's in the root along with like package.json. Taylor asked, where did I get the git ignore? I just cloned whatever Max had and it was in there. So maybe you don't have it. It's probably not that critical you don't have it. Do you folks know what a git ignore file does? Okay. It is a Git specific file that controls what what files and directories Git will check into source control for you. So like, for example, my git ignore file, it's like not going to look in my node modules directory, or not going to look in like a build directory. Like Palash had said he built his application locally, so like it won't check that in. Also, that .env.local file's in there too, in my case. But yeah, it's not that important to that you don't have it there. But if you want that, you can probably steal out of Max's project. Okay. Any other questions? So we're about to actually start getting running code. We gotta like, so a lot of these like third-party services that you end up using, there's a lot of like configuration first, like getting everyone speaking to each other, getting like everyone to know everyone else exists. And like once that you've done that, then you actually got to write the code. So we're sort of now just concluding that initial setup phase here. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to start to getting to write some code. So the way I've done this here for these code snippets is I've sort of put them in line and colored everything in green as the lines that I'm going to add. I'm going to like type all this into VS Code line by line, and we're going to talk about what everything does, but like sort of the way I've structured this. So if you see this slide, anything that's in white is like context, like code that's already in the project. Anything in green is code that you're going to have to like add in yourself. But let's talk about what we're going to do here. So that Clerk React package we installed, it exports, so we can import from it, a Clerk provider component. This React component, we're going to put at the root of our component hierarchy. And it contains a bunch of sort of like logic required for Clerk to function correctly. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to take this line up here. I'm going to copy that into, where am I? There we are. So I'm going to go to src app. So into the app file of our project. We're pretty much going to do everything in app. You, of course, could split it out into more files and directories and all that if you wanted to, but just for simplicity, to keep it all in one place, we're not writing that much code, so I'm just going to put all of it right into app. Okay. So I'm going to stick this at the very top. So I'm going to import this Clerk provider from the Clerk React package. Then this next bit below, so what this is doing, process.env is a way in Create React App. You can read what are called environment variables. How this exactly works is not all that critical. I can get into it more if folks are curious. But what this is effectively doing is reading this constant here from this .env.local file. It's going to pull it in, and it's going to be available in my project as process.env.reactApp clerk publishable key. So this value here is equivalent to this here. So you could imagine something like that sort of. So it's like a variable that's equivalent to that string. So what I'm doing here is I'm checking to see if it doesn't exist. So it wouldn't exist if maybe you forgot to set it, for example. Let's say I omitted this by accident. And if it's not set, I'm going to throw an error. Because in order for our app to build, we need this value to be set. Like we need to have our app to be configured to talk to Clerk properly. And if it's not, like that's kind of like an unrecoverable error. And once if assuming that's all set properly, I'm going to store that value into this variable here, Clerk publishable key. So for the rest of our file, anytime I refer to Clerk publishable key, it's going to be this value right here. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Okay, and the last part I'm going to do here is I'm going to use that Clerk provider component. So I'm going to go down here to this return, and I'm going to wrap my whole application here in the Clerk provider. Oh yeah, there we go. in. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this component here, this clerk provider component, is not something we've written. It's being imported from the clerk React package. And a prop of this component is this publish full key prop, and that's going to be equal to our clerk publishable key value from up here. Cool. So you save that. You might need to quit and restart your development server for it to pick up those changes, just because of the new .env file. It might not pick that up automatically. So I just hit Control-C, npm start again. And your applications should build still. There shouldn't be any syntax errors. Nothing should look different yet. But importantly, if you open it up in a web browser, you should still see like the front page of it. It should still look all fine. If you're having an issue with it building properly, let me know. Let's take a look at it. There's probably maybe a minor syntax thing or something, or maybe you forgot to put your environment variables in the right place, or we'll figure it out. But how's this going for folks? Generally looking good, or need some help?
I had to watch you first do it, so now I'm implementing it. So just one moment.
Yep, no problem. Chat thing here. Flash.
Ryan, when I did these steps, like my browser was showing an empty screen. Before that, it was showing the app.
Can you share your screen? Let's take a look.
Yeah. So I added. Well, I did the import. I did the if process, declared it, and then wrapped it around, and now it's showing an empty screen.
If you open up your developer tools, I bet you got an error in your JavaScript console.
Use effect.
Scroll up a little bit. That's exciting. Is that as far as you can go up, or can you go up further?
That's as far as.
Okay. Just as a troubleshooting step for me, can you comment out line 27 in your file? And then save it. Can you reload it? Reload the browser, see if. Okay, this might be a stupid question, but I do want to ask. Are you sure your app built successfully prior to this?
So
Okay.
I can undo all these changes, and here, let me undo all of it.
Yeah,
Then there.
very interesting. Can you redo them one by one and save it and see what breaks it?
Sure. Mm. Do you want me to unshare it? I don't want to take up everybody's time.
No, I think it probably makes sense to, like, I guess, how about this? Have other folks been having success? So I've been using Mac as example, and I sort of assumed that that would be emblematic of what everyone else had, but maybe not.
So I did this and I save it. That's okay.
I would guess almost certainly the problem's going to be on that last
The-
part, the clerk
yeah.
provider.
Yeah, I think so too.
But
It says like, do I need to add a use effect or something?
yeah,
No.
yeah.
Well, cannot read properties on use effect. Do I need to like add a use effect so this only runs I don't know something? When
I'm wondering if oh wait, can I read properties of
this?
Okay, I have a feeling I might know what's going on here, and if it is what I'm thinking it is, it's going to be a real pain to fix. But what I will say is, one thing you can check is look through your app and see if you have any instances of use effect in your and any of your pages. Maybe try like commenting them out or something and see if that fixes it.
Yeah,
Um, I don't think it's going to, but I just want to make sure that it's not your code before diving into it a bit more. Give that a shot. If it's still having a problem, we'll come back to you in a second.
Thank you.
Yep. How's it been going for everybody else? Any success, hopefully? Okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I'm just a little proud of myself. I was able to put everything incorrectly without like using live share, but I am having an issue with my npm start, which I want to figure out myself. So I haven't actually loaded it yet.
Cool. Corwin, it says you're missing the key. Make sure that your .local or .env.local file is in the root and not an src. If it is, then share your screen. Let's take a look. Or if it is in the root, yeah, that's what I meant. Okay. Okay, so you're seeing in your JavaScript console missing publishable key. Okay. So go take a look at your .env.local files. Just make sure that all looks good. Okay. Can you go to the very beginning of the line? Just want to make sure it starts with React app. Yep. Okay, cool. Go down to your development console and restart your development server just to make sure that it's pulled in that latest environment variable. So if you hit Control-C and then run npm start again, you should be able to do that. Kenny, if nothing's breaking, that means things are working. We haven't actually done any, like, we've sort of like we're still setting up the dominoes here. You're gonna see something happen in a second though.
The page is loading, my bad.
Cool. And if you refresh it in your web browser, does it work now?
Yeah, it's working again. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. I should have brought that up. The React app thing won't pull in environment variables by default. You've probably got to restart it to get them to pull it in. Cool. Palash, the use effect thing didn't help, I'm guessing. Okay.
Then
Here's what I might suggest. Download the Max's copy of the project and work in there. Just in case you're curious, like I think what's going on is there's something weird in the way you actually one thing you can try if you RMRF node modules and run npm install again, that might be one other thing to give a shot. But I think for some reason Clerk is not playing well with the version of React you have installed. Don't know why, but it seems like Clerk's trying to import use effect within itself, and that's not working for some reason. So
gotcha. And it has nothing to do with the deployment. Like
it shouldn't. I mean, you could delete build as well and see if that fixes anything, but I don't think it's going to do anything. I'd say like try RMRF node modules, delete that, run npm install, and then if that doesn't work, pull down Max's copy in the zip file. I think that's probably the best course of action at this point.
thank you.
Yep. Okay, cool. So I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to keep on moving. Okay, so this is where stuff gets a bit more exciting, where like things will actually start to happen. So there's a bit more green in this slide here. I'm going to go through it slowly though. So that import we made before we imported a Clerk provider, we've got to import a few more things. I'm going to take the stuff up here and I'm going to paste it in. So we're not just importing Clerk provider, we're importing like signed in, signed out, all this sort of stuff up here. Okay. Now we're going to include a bunch of Clerk specific routes. So we talked with Max about how React Router is this tool in Create React App that allows you to sort of configure different pages that the application can visit. Pinch and move fingers outward to zoom into screen. Is that directed at me or somebody else?
Not my bad. Just in general, like on Zoom, you can like pinch and zoom outward, so you can like if the code is too small, just to be able to see it.
Ah, okay. Is the code too small, or I need to make it bigger? Or
No, you're good.
oh, I'm good. I'm good. Okay, okay, cool. So you all are probably familiar with React Router at this point. It's this tool with Create React App you can use to configure where the application is going to visit. You can have multiple different pages, you have different routes, you can have dynamic routes with like the :ID sort of syntax here. So we're going to add a few more routes. And these are Clerk specific routes. Okay, come on. Freaking not good with VS Code. So I'm just going to do it the crappy way. Okay.
What do you use every day, Ryan? I'm just curious.
I'm a Vim user.
Oh,
So I'm crazy.
yep, you are.
So there are 3 routes we've added here: sign in, sign up, and protected. So sign in is a route that's going to render a component built by Clerk, the sign in component. So this is one of the things we imported up here. Now, the way this component works, you've actually got to tell it where it's located. So we're telling Clerk, okay, this is located at /signin. Same thing with the sign up. We're telling it it's located at /signup. And these routes are important because the way Clerk works, its sort of default setup is all those workflows we talked about, where like you've got all these different steps you have to go through in building a system, where you've got like the change password, you've got the sign in, you've got the sign up. Clerk has all these built for you. So what you can do is you can just make these routes and say, render the Clerk version of this. And you just sort of instantly have that workflow implemented for you. So in this case, with like 2 lines of code, we've now implemented signing in and signing up. Excellent. I'm also adding here a third endpoint or third route called protected. Protected is a route that users will not be allowed to visit until they've logged in. So importantly, once you like / project details, page 2, all these don't require you to be logged in. Protected will. And the way this sort of works is I've got these like series of components laid out here. The signed in component is a clerk component that anything that's inside of this will only render if you are signed in. So if you're not signed in, it won't actually render this H1 here. The signed out component is the opposite. So it will only render if you're signed out. So like think of this as sort of like, this is like the if and this is like the else. And then within the signed out, I've got this component redirect to sign in. So the way this kind of reads is, if you're signed in, render this. If you're signed out, redirect to the sign in. And this causes the web browser to redirect to this route and to go through the sign in process. Okay. And there's one last thing we need at the very bottom. This extra prop on clerk provider. We've got to give it this navigate thing just in order to make it work right. Okay. So at this point, with those 3 additions, if you go over here, this is where I really hope everything works, so I'm going to look really kind of stupid. So we're going to go over here, and I'm going to go to /protected. So notice what happened there. I went to /protected, and it went into here. It went to protected. It rendered this route. Inside of here, it saw, oh, okay, signed in. I'm not signed in, I'm signed out. Okay, so go to signed out, and then redirect to sign in. So it redirected to sign in, and you can now see that I'm now at /sign in. Okay, and you notice I'm looking at a sign-in page. I'm looking at a login page. So this is like Clerk's default login page that they configure for you. Okay. Cool. So, Koda, I saw you had a question for me. I just want to sort of get all that put out there. What was your question?
So I'm thinking just in terms of what we gotta do. I just had it. I should have wrote it down. In terms of our capstone, there you go. I wrote down that word. In terms of our capstone, if we've already put in a form, is this something that we could put in place of it, or like I'm confused at how to transfer this kind of stuff to my capstone.
Yeah, so your capstone's, I would guess, written in React. It's using React Router. It's somewhat similar to the portfolio site and the technologies that have been used. So let's say in your capstone, I mean, I'm just going to put an example out there. I realize your capstone's probably different, but like you're building some sort of like social media application. I'm going to go back to that example. That's something where there are parts of that application that you want to be public, and there are parts that you want to be private. So any part that you want to be private, you can follow this sort of protected pattern I just went through. And this is sort of how you can make a route only visible to a user if they're logged in. So maybe like the user's profile page or their settings page. These would be, or like things like that would be like the places where you do this kind of thing.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Yep. You're probably also not going to see continue with Google. You probably might see something else, but just if you get to this page here with like the sign in, the white box, the sign in, you're in a very good place. So how's it going? Have folks had success with this? Do you have any questions?
Okay, I'm not really sure what's going on. Like, I'm having that problem too. Mine won't npm start, and I've been like trying to figure it out in the background, but it just won't. I don't know if I forgot something or what.
Share your screen. Let's take a look.
All
Thank
right.
you, Allie, by the
No
way.
No problem.
Girl, oh my God.
Okay, yeah, so this is that extra. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, I see now. It's like doing this weird thing. All right. But yeah, that
Okay.
was trying to figure it out. But this is my code right here.
Ah, yeah. So I see. So I'll tell you kind of what my thought process when I go through and I see this. So I see React scripts command not found. And I don't know how much Max talked to you about create React app, but the way it works it has this package called React scripts, sort of like powers how all the React stuff works. And it also above it I see module not found. So I'm curious if you were to do like a run like ls or take a look at that directory, is there a node modules directory in there?
Mm.
Doesn't look like it.
Oh, I
So
see. That makes sense.
probably have to run npm install first. And then after you run that, I bet if you run npm start, things will look a little better.
That's hilarious because I'm like, maybe Max took out the no modules folder because it's easier to compress and send. And I never considered like going to re-download it. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I should have mentioned if you pulled down the zip file, you're gonna have to run npm install to bring in those dependencies. Typically people don't commit that directory.
Thank you. Let me see. It should work now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's so funny
Well,
because I knew the answer.
excellent.
Wow.
Excellent.
So just for clarification, the dependency was the React router DOM, like we have to literally install it, being that we kind of just use Max folder.
You're gonna need to. Oh, you're having the same issue as Palash.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, we'll look at that in a second. But you said I think that was Rain. It was asking that. So running npm install will take everything in the package.json and will create the node modules directory and pull that stuff down for you again. So you don't have to install a specific dependency. You're sort of pulling everything down all at once.
Okay, I'll try that. One moment.
Cool.
Hey, Ryan. So when I downloaded Max's folder and started with that, it did the same thing to me. So I went
Yeah.
over and npm installed the clerk all over again, and then it started working. You want to try if that works for someone?
Oh, so you did npm install and then you installed clerk with npm install at clerk/clerk react.
Mm-hmm. In the integrated terminal, a pwd, I made sure I'm in the right folder, and then I npm install clerk. That worked, but that was Max's folder too. Max's
Yeah.
yeah.
Wait, is that what we put in .env?
No, that's let me pull up a slide here. That's really making me curious about how clerks got their dependencies set up and for doing something clever. That's this command here. So this was step 2 right after we did set up the clerk account. So if you run this this command here again, it sounds like at least with Palash that seemed to help. Where is my chat? There's my chat. Chat.
Wait,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask Palash. So did you did you like uninstall or like how did you
Now, okay, let me just share my screen super quick. So what I just did was I after I pasted all the clerk provider and all the commands that were going up here, that's when I control seed and npm install clerk react and then refresh the browser, and that's it. I did not uninstall anything, just those 2 steps.
Okay. Thank you.
So Corwin, you asked, how'd you get your import clerk React to go straight across? Mine stacked. So Max, I think at one point had you set up a extension in VS Code that when you save would auto format your code. It probably makes a lot of sense for where you folks are to have that, because what it'll do is it'll auto do all the white space for you. It'll leave things easier to debug. For me, I really don't like those sorts of extensions. And the reason why I don't like them is I want to have tight control over how things look, because I'm a little picky about that. And also, like, sometimes those extensions will do kind of like make poor formatting choices. So I don't have that extension installed. So because of that, when I save my file, it doesn't auto reformat automatically. So that's why it goes straight across. But it doesn't matter. It's just white space changes. It shouldn't change how the code runs. Yeah, prettier. That's the extension. How's it going though, folks? Has anyone been able to see that sign-in page? Just want to make nice. Okay, sweet. That's exciting.
Hey,
Um,
I noticed when you went to yours, my bad, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, go for it.
The background was the same color. For some reason, mine turned white. I don't know why. It doesn't matter. I got it to show up, but it just bothers me that it's not the same color as my page.
Did you pull down Max's example or using your own code?
I was using my own example.
That's probably why Max probably did something. Maybe like he had a background color on his body or something. Yeah. So also like, I mean, I'll share my screen here. Just go back to it for a second. But like, to state the obvious, a little ugly right now. Like it's not centered. You could do the whole thing where like, and I'm leaving this as like an exercise for you all to figure out, because I know you can do it. But you could go into here and you could be like, okay, I'm going to give it like a margin 0 auto, and then like I guess like padding top, like you can sort of do the thing to like center it and make it look good. I'm not going to worry about that. For this class today, we're just worried about functionality, not aesthetics. So one other question for you all. So when you do this, what do you see? Does it say continue with Google for you, or do you see a username and password sort of box? I'm guessing you probably just see username and password sort of box. Oh, okay. You see what I have. Okay. So you'll notice here, at least with mine, it sounds like for you too, there's a couple different options for signing in. There's like the what they call social auth or OAuth sign in, where you can like continue with Google, or there's like email address. So what or you can like click sign up and make an account. You can sort of go through all the different workflows here and try things. So if you want to, we're not going to go too much into this here, but I just want to bring it up. In the clerk dashboard, under user and authentication on the side, if you go down here and you look through all these options, you can kind of configure what different ways users can sign in. So let's say, for example, I wanted to add like sign in with GitHub. What I can do is I can enable that. And then I come over here and I refresh it. And now that's there. And I'll say, as someone who's built these things before, this is downright magical, that all this stuff just like kind of like works. And like I can click this and like, hey, now it's bringing me through the whole workflow there. I can click sign with Google, do the same kind of thing. So anyway, you are welcome. Maybe after we've sort of gone through today's lesson, just to make sure like you don't screw anything up, but you're welcome to go in here and play around. Like there's a lot of pretty interesting settings they have. Like you can turn on like two-factor authentication, and you can try all the different things. And also I'll mention that anything labeled premium in sort of the mode we've got clerk right now, you can use it. So there's nothing you can't try. So like feel free to like give things a shot and see what's cool. Yeah, anyway. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to sign in with Google. Okay, so after I do that, it's going to just bring me back to the root of the application. I'm going to go select it back to /protected. And now I see that H1 that we had there before. So if you can go, if you've got everything to work, go through the login process, make yourself an account. And also what'll happen is once you make yourself an account, Clerk will give you a bunch of confetti. They've got an interesting little UX team that does some crazy stuff. Yeah, so
Ryan, when you get a chance, I just need your help.
yeah.
All right, so definitely had a proud moment. You know, I was LSing, seeding into the right folder, did the npm install, got the start to work. Can I share my screen?
Yep, go for it.
Okay, hold on a second. Once I get that out the way. Okay, so I'm getting this right. Hold on 1 second. So this is my code. Everything's good to go. As you can see, I have export default app. But when I go to deploy it, where's my local host?
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna work.
It's saying this right here. And I really tried to debug it myself. It's saying that it's lowercase. I saved it in everything.
Yeah, so go back over to your code for a second.
Okay, second.
Scroll up a little bit to the very top.
No, I'm not using live share. I'm really trying to sit here and type it in line from line so I can remember why I'm doing it.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
I could be missing something.
Yeah,
Oh, I have a little red object squiggly line. Hold on.
yeah, so I guess right off the bat, I'll mention that there's a couple syntax things I'm noticing here.
Yeah.
For one, between line 10 and 11, you need to close curly brace. So that's what that red curly brace is there. You got to close your if.
Yep, I did miss that.
Not on line 12. So like swap line 11 and line 12. So you want the curly brace after the throw before the const.
Got you. You're absolutely correct because that goes by itself. Damn.
Okay. Also, under the scroll down a little bit further.
Yeah.
So on line 41, 42, 43, 44. So the way you're going to want to do this, you want to put your clerk provider around the div class name app container. So like you want to put clerk provider on line 32 and close it like below line 35 or 45, excuse me.
Okay, let me make these corrections and include the sign in and sign out part that you showed us, and then I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. The one last thing I'll mention is you need to make sure you import all your stuff. At the very top of the file, you're missing that import from @clerk/clerk react. So just make sure you put that in. But I think those three things are the things I see that you're missing at least. Oh, wait, you have that on line 6. Oh, you have the import. Okay, never mind. You're good with the import. Didn't see it.
Yep, let
cool.
me fix that. And if any questions, I'll ask you again. Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay. Have folks made an account with Clerk on their end for anyone who's gotten it working? Okay. Let's take a look at what you can do now that you've done this. So obviously we're in our application here. See, this page is protected. But if you go back over to your Clerk dashboard, there's a bunch of cool little settings in here you can play around with. So there's actually a users thing on the side here, and you can see a list of all users that have signed up for your application. So I can click on me here and see all my information that I've pulled from my Google account, my name. You can do things like allow user to delete their account. You can even click this little button here, impersonate. Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's fine. And that'll bring me over to here, and I can actually edit other user details. I can see where things are logged in. There's a lot of sort of, well, what I'm actually doing here isn't too critical, but this is to say, like, you can see everyone who's signed up. This is sort of like your user management dashboard for your application. And as someone who's built these systems before, it's great. You don't have to build one of these because you usually have to build one of these when you make a system. You've got to like have a way you can manage all this stuff. You can also do stuff like, let's say you want to delete the user. So like I can delete the user, and then if I log in with this Google account again, it's going to create a brand new user. So this gives me all the sort of management stuff I need to make sure like I'm understanding who's using my application. Cool. Okay.
So Ryan, can I just ask a question?
Yep.
You know how like once we logged in, it says this page is protected. And again, I'm thinking about my capstone. So this, where this says this page is protected, that would be like whatever I wanted users to see once they were able to sign in, right?
Exactly. So we're going to oh, people are asking about a break. Like we're going to take a break like right after this. This is sort of about our point. So after we answer these questions, we're probably going to go on a break. So just FYI. But yeah, so that protected page is like if you were showing something to a user, it's like their own private page. That's where it would go. So I went back to the social media example there previously, but like another case is like, let's say you've got you're building like an email client, like something like Gmail. So you log in and your like email inbox, a web page for that would be like what you have on that, like this page is protected kind of thing. And you wouldn't want to show that to a user if they're not logged in. If they try to visit that page, it would direct them to like, you'd want to direct them to the login page, not like some weird like email inbox that like, because they're not logged in, so you don't really know who that email inbox is for. So you really have to like, you have to log them in before they can see that page. Okay. Folks are hungry, it looks like. I'm also kind of hungry. So let's take our break. Let's get back here at like maybe 7:45, I guess. Okay, cool. And once we get back, we'll do a couple more things, and then we're going to be mostly done for the day. Cool. Okay, see you folks at 7:45. Gonna start the recording because gotta remember to do that. Okay. So we have gotten through most of our material for today. Probably got maybe like 15, 20 minutes more of stuff, if that, and then we're good. So I'm assuming everyone's back. We're well past our time, so I'm gonna share my screen again here. So I kind of spoiled it here, but like the next kind of step is you visit protected, you go through, you create your account, you sign in, you should see if this page is protected. So after you've gone through that whole setup process, you should have a user account. You'd see like the row in your clerk dashboard and everything's great. So there's a few more things I want to do because we've sort of got like our MVP here of this sign in working. Like you can log in, but there's a lot of things that are missing. Like you can't change your password. Like you can't sign out right now. That's a pretty important one. So there's a lot of extra things we can add. And luckily, Clerk has built a lot of this stuff for us. First of all, though, actually, before I do that, I'm going to have us refactor this code a little bit. So previously, under the route here, had element and then a div and just a bunch of stuff inside of there. So instead of that, this is doing the exact same thing, but instead of having that inline right here, I've made a new component called protected that renders, so this here is the same as this here. And then this here is, oh wait, actually, okay. Yeah, so I'm realizing there's a couple new things I introduced here. But the first thing is sort of abstracting out into the components like this. So I'm going to sort of do that work here. I'm going to take this, I'm going to cut that, go function protected. And yeah, I gotta wrap it in div. That's what I forgot. Okay. So what I've done here is I've moved all that stuff from down here up into that. So I'm just gonna render protected. Oh, protected here as well. Okay, cool. So just moved everything into another component. So refresh this, everything still works the same. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. Then after that, I'm going to do one other thing, and that's I'm going to actually move all the stuff inside of signed in into its own component. So I'm pretty sure I call that, yeah, protected sign in. I'm going to go function protected signed in. I'm going to pick this up here. Okay. So again, I haven't changed anything here, like what's actually going on. I've just sort of reordered, refactored, moved things around a little bit. So it's now, instead of it just being like one big blob of JSX, I've got this protected component and this protected sign-in component, which is up here. Okay. Now, why did I do all this? Well, first of all, having all these extra components can make it a little bit easier to organize things so that you can sort of keep track of where things are. You could move some of the stuff to different files, stuff like that. But the other reason why is because in order to add some of those extra features I talked about, we need to have a component that's rendered inside of this signed in bit here. So this component needs to be in a place where whenever it's rendering, the user's always signed in. Oh, Palash, the live share link should be in the Slack channel. She hasn't changed. Cool. So what I've done here, this is most of this. There's a couple other small changes I'm going to do. So up here, there's a couple other things I'm going to import from Clerk React. A couple other pieces we're going to use to implement those extra features I talked about. Import user button and use user. I'm just going to copy the code straight from here. So I'm going to use this use user hook. So it's a custom hook that Clerk defines, this use user. And this, what it allows you to do is get the current state of the user object. So this is how we can get information about the user that's logged in, which is kind of nice. And, oops, copy. Come on, VS Code, you can do it. Paste, there we go. Okay. So now what I've done here, I haven't changed too much. So I've still got this H1 here. I've got a div that wraps it all though, just to make it a little bit nicer. And I've rendered two more things in here. So from this use user hook from Clerk, it gives you back this user object. And this contains a bunch of information about the currently logged in user. So for example, first name is the user's first name. And I was able to get this from the Google sign-in. So it's sort of pulling that in from Google, and it's now available in Clerk. There's a bunch of interesting metadata on this user object. There's like email address is like on there, a bunch of interesting stuff. So I'll let you poke around there on your own time and figure it out. But we're going to just go with first name for now. And then lastly, there's this user button here. Now, what's cool about this is a component that Clerk has pre-built. That is like kind of like the equivalent of this button over here for Google, where like you click that and it gives you like all the accounts that are signed in. You can like switch between them, and you can like manage your account. And take it from me, building these things is like a task. It takes you a while. There's a lot of edge cases you have to worry about. So having it already built for you is pretty nice. um, so after making those changes, I'm going to save this. And by the way, the state of this here should at this point match everything here. Instead of just copying the code in this time, I adapted it a bit piecemeal, but like it should be the same. So if I come over here, you're going to see it looks a little different now. So I've got that that background color white div around everything. It says, welcome, my name. And I'm rendering this user button here. So what this user button does, it renders a thing like this. So I can do like click manage account and come in here and be like, oh, okay, maybe I want to connect a new account, like connect a GitHub account. Or maybe I want to like add an email address or like delete my account down here or something. And you didn't have to build any of this. It's just built right into Clerk. And it like looks pretty good. It like generally works pretty well. Yeah, so this would be the kind of thing you might render sort of like with the Google example here, like on the rightmost side of like a nav bar or something. I think you can also change your profile. Yeah, you can change your image, profile image in here as well. Cool. So I'd love if everyone could get this in the example they've got locally if they're following along. Should be able to, again, just copy and paste this code directly from this example. Or steal it from the live share. But
Ryan, I have a question. So how did you get your name to pop up? Did you go back into Clerk and
how did I get what to pop up? Sorry.
this is like welcome and then Ryan? How did you get
Yeah, so what I did there is, so I added this p tag right here, welcome user.firstname. And this value here, user, is coming from here on line 14 from this use user hook. This is a custom hook or custom React hook that's built into Clerk. And just like sort of like use state or use effect, it's like a hook that you can use in React to get information about sort of the system or tie into React at a bit of a deeper level. So this hook is a way you can get information about the currently logged in user. And just to be transparent, like this hook here is imported right here. So I added that import right over here in this code example. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So you could use this information if you wanted to show information about the user in your application, or you could maybe even send that information to a backend server like we're going to do tomorrow, and you could like use that for something as well. Wash.
Is it possible to like retrieve like some sort of user ID from anyone who logs into our, so we can like pull it in a data table and save some data in their name?
Palash, we're doing that tomorrow.
Thank you.
But yes, there is a, I think actually in that user object, there's a either ID or user ID or something like that field. Let's see. ID? Let's see. Yeah. So this is where that identifier. We're going to use that tomorrow for a few things, but we're going to get it a bit of a different way.
How would you suggest, like, for example, for someone like I have this capstone where I'm gonna be saving movie ratings from different users. Like, would you should I like follow this user ID like throughout all the tables, or should it have like a different user ID for everyone, and then there is a foreign key in every one of them linking together?
Yeah, we're going to talk about this tomorrow. But the short version is the way I tend to like to do it is I like to have a user table and then have a column on that user table that's a foreign key to like the clerk external identifier. The reason
Okay.
why I think that's kind of nice is it means you could include extra metadata about the user in that table. So like you're not just reliant on like clerk for that user identity piece. Like you have your own sort of local version of it as well.
Okay. Can you tomorrow will we also go through like if we want to set up like more than one foreign keys in a table? Like so
Uh,
into
I'm
my
not going to touch on it explicitly. I think Max is maybe going to go into it next week. So maybe to peel back the covers a bit, I'm only available for 2 days, so I'm trying to like get the most out of my 2 days. And Max is going to go into some more in-depth stuff. Like I'm not going to be using like SQLize. I think you covered that earlier this week. We're not going to be using that tomorrow just because we needed to get something kind of working. But Max is going to sort of do a little bit of rehashing with some SQLize involved, and it's going to result in probably a more robust thing, like maybe like I would guess like end of next week or so.
no problem. Thank you.
Yep. But all very good questions. I will point out though, like one thing that would not be a good idea is to take a user ID from the client, send it to the server, and use that as your point of truth on who's logged in, because that's not a secret value. Like that identifier is somewhat well known, and like if anyone has that value, it's almost like it's a password at that point. They can impersonate that user. So we're gonna do things properly with like tokens tomorrow, and we're gonna go into kind of how that works. But yeah, cool. Any other questions?
This was actually more simple to deploy than I thought it would be.
Yeah. They normally are. These sorts of systems are normally not this simple. Which I like. That's why I'm a fan of Clerk. It's pretty good. So in a project I'm working on at work right now, I'm using Clerk to do login for a mobile app, and it's completely passwordless. So the way the login works is when you go to the mobile app, you enter your phone number, and I've configured Clerk so that it will send a text message to your phone number, and then there's a little message box in the app where you have to type in that code and then click submit. And there's like that's the login process. Like there's no username and password. And what was so cool about that is for the most part, I didn't have to write anything custom. The only thing I did is I wrote a custom like login page, but it was largely like I just backed everything. It was sort of like a custom styled version of what they had largely. And yeah, it pretty much worked, which was cool. So I haven't really used Clerk at like a large scale yet or anything like that, but so far I've been very pleasantly surprised.
Does Clerk allow you to create like a user table like you showed us in the beginning of today's class, or would you literally have to do SQL or SQLize or whatever separately?
Yeah, so it really depends on kind of what you need to do for your application. You might be able to get away with like, let's say you have like a list of things, and those list of things are like associated with a user. You might be able to get away with having a column on that table. It's like the Clerk user ID. But keep in mind that then you don't really have a way you can store information about a user. You're just storing that like this thing's associated with that user, but you're unable to really store like metadata about the user. That might be fine for your use case, but I tend to find that you end up eventually needing to store metadata about a user. So it usually makes sense to just spend the time up front, give yourself the user table that you can then use in all your data modeling. The other thing to keep in mind there too is I think Max touched on this yesterday, this concept of joining. Does that maybe ring a bell? The word join? Okay. So yeah. It's complicated. I fully acknowledge that. But the reason why I bring it up is if you have data that's outside of your database, you can't join against it. So if you want to write a query that's more complicated, you sometimes get into situations where you want to query something, but it's not in your database. So you can't really write a very efficient query to query it, because like you'd have to like return a bunch of data to the server, and the server would have to like reach out to some other service and like do a bunch of like in-memory like data munging, like filtering, like sort of your query wouldn't really be able to be fully in the database. And like for smaller apps, not as big of a deal, but at a certain scale, that becomes a really big problem. So for the most part, like they call a database for a reason. It's the base for all your data, I guess. It's a good idea if you can to get as much data as possible into that one location, because it's just going to make it much easier to query and to interrogate, and you won't have to play games to make that work. I've been in contexts where I have not had that luxury, and it results in some very unfortunate decisions needing to be made. Yeah.
Thank you for your response. But before you go, do you have
Yeah.
like a link with more information on the term joining?
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but you know, just to
Well,
add, you know.
it is self-explanatory, kind of, but so for many years, I was not very good at SQL. And the reason why I was never very good is I never really had to get very good. I was able to rely on tools like SQLize, like ORMs, to do a lot of work for me. And then I had to work on a project where I didn't have any of that, and I had to very quickly figure it all out. And joins are one of those things where I, for years, couldn't really figure out how they worked, because when everyone explains it, they explain it in a way too complicated way for me. So what people will often show are these things, this freaking diagram. So when it's like someone would show this to me and they'd be like, this is how joins work. See, doesn't it make sense? And I look at this, I'm just like, what the heck even is this?
Is it like a Venn diagram or something?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's this never was very helpful to me. The way I think about a join, this is way oversimplified, but this makes sense to me at least. The way I think about it is if you have two tables, and you have one table where you have a column that like a bunch of like maybe you have one column that's like user ID in one table, and then another table you've got like a users table, and you've got an ID column in that table. What joining allows you to do is your query, like you're running a select, you're doing like a select from a table, and then so there's some examples here of like how you would write a join. So like right here, like select from table A, left join. So like the join is like a sort of like a stanza you have in your SQL query. And what it's doing effectively is saying for every row in your table, the table you're selecting from, find find a correlating row in the other table you're joining against and add it to the end of your table. So what you end up with at the end of the join is a table that has all the columns of the table you're querying, the table in the from, and the table that you're joining. So in this case, you'd have all the columns from table A and all the columns from table B, all in one big wide table. And what the join is doing, what this sort of like join on thing is doing, is this is how it's able to figure out what rows from table B, like which row from table B to associate with each row in table A. So it's how it's able to figure out how to link them up properly. So if you do a query like this, what you'll get as a result, like you like can add nothing else, just like the select and the join, is you'll get like a really big wide table. And there's all these crazy diagrams, which they are like, for me, it's made more sense as I've gotten more into it. But this is like, someone's going to show you this at some point. And like, I just want to like put out there, because this is like people will show this to me for years, and this just like never made any sense to me. So don't feel bad if you feel the same way. But like that idea about joining, where like it's deciding like how the two tables, which rows correlate, is kind of was the thing that really unlocked it for me. Does that make sense?
So yeah, I can see myself using this like with finding correlating ages or maybe
Yeah.
something numeric with money or something like that. But again, it takes both tables, find what correlates, and appends it to the end, right?
Yep, exactly. And not appends it at the end, but sort of like links those rows together. So I want to do a little example for you here, because I think if I have SQLite on here.
You.
Yeah, I do. Excellent. Okay. So I'm doing this in this thing called SQLite. Doesn't really matter. It's a database. It still has all the same stuff. If you run all this in like Postgres, it'll do all the same stuff. Like this is all generic enough SQL where it doesn't really matter what database engine you're in. So I'm going to make a new table. I'm going to create a table, and I'm going to call it. Also, I should say, by the way, I'm realizing I'm doing this. I'm not doing this in Beekeeper. I'm just running the SQL just manually, like against the database. I'm going to type out the SQL and hit enter. This is the same kind of thing as if in Beekeeper you were to put it in a little text box and hit run. So like I'm going to just type it out, hit enter. It's going to run that SQL command. I got to get Beekeeper set up for tomorrow. It's not a tool I'm very familiar with. So I'm doing this on the fly. I'm using what I know. So hopefully this makes sense. So I'm going to make a table. I'm going to call it user. And I'm going to give it an ID. Oh, God. I'm going to peek ahead at tomorrow to make sure I get this right. There we go. I think this works in SQLite. I guess we'll see. Actually, I'm going to go that. I'm going to go name, text, not, no, something, not, something like that. Okay, and now if I go select star from user, okay, I think that's good. Okay, so cool. I've made myself a user table. So what's actually going on here? Like, I think you're probably getting the rough idea. The exact syntax is not all that critical. We're just going more conceptual right now. So got that user. I'm going to make like, I'm going to go like posts. So I'm going to add so just imagine like or maybe like comments. That's maybe better. Comments. Okay. So we've now got our a comment table. We've got our ID, and then I'm going to make here a user ID. So that's going to be a how would I do that in this? I guess I could go. Let's do it. Okay. I need to do this in Postgres because I don't know the exact thing in SQLite. Give me a second here. Doing it on the fly. That means getting the raw and unfiltered version of this. Okay. Okay, excellent. Let me do that again here. I'm gonna make my table one more time here. Where did I go? Did I clear it? Yeah, I cleared it. Okay, create table user ID serial primary key name text. what did I screw up?
While you're doing that, I was thinking of an example. So let's say, for instance, I have a website with a subscription and I want to know all the users who have paid a certain amount. So I would do a Venn diagram to see who matches that certain dollar amount. And if it correlates with the main price that I'm looking for, then it would append it. I think I'm on the right track.
I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Freaking users a reserved word in SQL. Okay. Use we're gonna call it my user. Okay, there we go. Excellent. Okay. So now I've got a table called my user. I'm also going to make a table now called comment. So comment's going to have an ID. I'm also going to give comment a user ID. And oh, I didn't mean to give it a name. Okay. Let's do this. Drop table comment. I wanted to have a message. Okay. So my user table, it has an ID column and a name column. And then the comment table has an ID column, a user ID column, and a message column. Okay. So I'm going to insert into my user name values me. I'll also make a few more. John, Susie, and I don't know. Tammy. Okay. Flex star from my user. So we've got our rows, got a bunch of IDs for each one. Should generally make sense, I'd imagine. Okay, so now I'm going to make a few comments. So insert into comment user ID message values. Let's go like, okay. So I want to do, maybe I'm going to have a comment that I wrote. So user ID of 1. And I'll say my text is like test comment moderate, because that's my thing. Okay. And then maybe I'll have a comment that Tammy wrote. And then I'll go like, this was written by Tammy. And then finally also make one for John. So John wrote this, I guess. Okay. So now that's our comment table. That's our user table. Okay, that was all set up. Now let's write a couple queries with join, because I forgot who asked, but it's a fun one to give it a shot here. So what I'm going to do, probably the simplest query I can write here, is let's say for every comment, I want to get information about the user that wrote that comment. I want to get that user's name. So really what I want is something where I want like the ID of the comment, the user ID, the user name, and then the message. So imagine you're like showing a list of these comments. You want to be able to show like user information alongside every comment. So like you want to show like the username, obviously. Like you want to show, you don't want to show like a user ID on the web page. You want to show information the user will be able to utilize. So the way that you do this, so like the way I would write this query is something like select star from comment left join my user, and I'm going to explain this in a second. I'm just going through, I'm just typing it all out here. I'm going to like walk through it bit by bit. So my user on my user.id is equal to comment.user ID. So you see here what happened, where at the end of every row now, I've sort of got like a combination of the two tables. So like this on the left here, these first three columns, these are from the comment table. And the last two columns here are from the my user table. And they kind of like smushed them together. That's what a join does. It's like a smushing thing. But importantly, I've just been noticing people have been like typing comments and I haven't been watching. Oh, okay, it's fine. Nothing critical. So like that's what joining does. It will combine the two tables together like that. So what's this is doing here? So like this part probably makes sense to everybody. I'm not worried about that. This part here, the left join bit, what this does is it's saying left join. You don't have to worry about the different type of joins. Just left is probably what you're going to want most of the time at the beginning. My user, so I want to join in data from this other table. And then I want to equate each row. So every row where user ID and the comment user ID field and the my user ID field are equivalent, that's how it knows what rows to pair up. So like this and this will always be the same because that was like the requirement on how that join happened. Yeah, so that's kind of joining. There's a couple things I'll also mention here too, which is like it's possible for these rows to be empty. Like if I had like let's say I made a comment where the user ID was something like bogus. Like I'm going to do something like that. Now, you'd normally have constraints and stuff to make sure this wouldn't actually be possible. But to give you an example, like in this case, you'll see these are empty. And it's because there was it couldn't correlate with anything. Like there wasn't a match. So it just like left it unset. So this is like, these are all like behaviors that you sort of end up learning about as you have to write these more complicated queries. And what you often end up doing is you can kind of imagine if you take this joining concept further, like you have a first table, you can join in a second table, and then you can join in a table that uses fields from the second join table. You could like join like 5 tables deep if you need to like follow some relationship through some winding path through the database. And that's a thing you will often end up doing. So that's like, that is a very high level introduction to joins. And I'll say like probably about 80% of what I tend to use them for right there. So I forgot who asked about that, but whoever it is really good at getting me going down on tangents.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Anyway, we're pretty much at the end here. So we added that. We added that. We looked at this thing. It works. The last thing I was going to say is if you want to add another route, like you can just follow the same pattern. So I would add like, instead of just protected, I've now got another protected route. And I've got my other set of components for both of those. And you can sort of go through the same pattern. So if you wanted to add like 2 routes, no problem. You just sort of follow the same thing. You make the route, you make the components, and you're good. We don't have to go through that. I mean, it's the same thing we just did, but just kind of again. And now we're on to tomorrow. So that's it. Any thoughts?
If there aren't any thoughts, should we just log off? Or because I mean, there was a question that I kind of answered. So someone asked, did the clerk user IDs have an expiry? If it's a long one, we could save it for tomorrow and log off though, you know.
It's not. They don't expire.
Oh.
So typically IDs don't expire. What's going to expire is like a token or something like that. Cool. That's all I got. See you all tomorrow. One thing I will mention is we're going to build off what we did today tomorrow. So make sure you keep all your code around. We're going to use it again in tomorrow's class. But looking forward to it and see you then. Have a good evening. Bye.